there's a discipline to theatre, I suppose, and there's a kind of you need to know your lines, you need to like turn up on time. You know, there's a real discipline to performance on stage, which is sort of ingrained, and perhaps that helps just for preparation for TV and film. But I think TV and film help theatre in a way of like getting into the real nuance of thought. Like the camera sees things that an audience can't because it gets so close. So there's a sense of like the intricacies of detail that you need on screen. You need on stage too, but they're more physical. They're more in your whole body, whereas the camera sees your thoughts. So I think that it helps you to be even more nuanced on the stage. Like film and TV help that.
Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Jazz Tangcay, Senior Artisans Editor at Variety. Now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce actor and producer of True Things, Ruth Wilson.
Hello.
Hi, Ruth. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very, very excited to dive into this because for True Things, this was your first outing as a producer. So just, take us back. Because True Things is actually based on a novel by Deborah K. Davies. What was it about the novel that really spoke to you?
Yeah, so I was doing a play with Jude Law about 10 years ago called Anna Christie, and his production company were being sent various material to produce, and one of which was this book, Deborah K. Davies's book called True Things About Me. And he said, Ruth, I think there's something in this. Can you have a read and see what you think? And I read it and I was immediately drawn by the kind of atmosphere of the book. It was an incredibly subjective lens, a female subjective lens on these kind of relationships, these toxic relationships, which feel almost obsessional and addictive in their kind of quality and essence. I also was struck by the kind of humor of this character, that even though she was seemingly a victim and at will of this man, she had this kind of acute observation of the world around her and this quirk. And she felt like a sort of woman that was still hadn't found herself yet, but was deeply funny and, had lacked a confidence around that. But I thought there was something really wonderfully quirky about her and moving about her in that way. But what we were really drawn to and what I thought hadn't really been seen before was that kind of obsessional quality of the first stages of infatuation. And I think it felt really universal to me. It felt like it's almost a rite of passage relationship, that you fall for someone that's not quite right for you. And, 5 years later, you're like, why on earth did I engage in that relationship? And I think we've all been there. And it's like, what is it why do we do that? Why is love blind in that way? And is that about society expectations and pressures? Is it about the extraordinary sort of act of imagination that humans have to kind of project onto something onto someone that's not true? They want something so badly, they're willing to pretend and look, imagine it could happen. So I thought actually it's really sort of rich territory to investigate. And that's why I moved forward with it. Yeah.
I love that because, as you said, this journey that we go on with your character, Kate, she's somebody that we've all, as you said, it's a universal story. We've all been there. How did you tap into Kate? Like, talk about your process and like who she was, what she's experiencing, when you first encountered Tom Burke's character. Like, take us through your process as an actress. And
yeah. I mean, I always felt that she was someone that was kind of sleepwalking through her life, that she sort of found herself in a dead-end job that her friend also does, that she kind of just followed other people slightly. She was a bit of a sheep. She sort of hadn't owned her own life in a way. And I always imagined that and we built a sort of backstory for her, that she was someone that had artistic kind of ambitions at one point in her life. Like, she went to art school, but it never quite worked out, didn't know quite where to go. And so found herself in a job that didn't satisfy her, in a world that shouldn't fit in with her friends, shouldn't fit in with what her parents wanted from her. but she was kind of stuck there. And yeah, maybe slightly depressed, but certainly like not able to make choices, confident choices in where she wanted to go. So I felt that also felt quite universal and very common as a experience for many people, early 30s, especially. You sort of find yourself a bit lost. And then, of course, this man comes into her life and it just reinvigorates. It gives her something. And he's not all, I mean, yes, he's toxic. He's not great. He's not a good choice. But what I loved about the complexity of that is that he also did recognize things in her that others couldn't. He recognized her humor. He recognized things about her that she wasn't able to see in herself, or she knew that existed in herself, but wasn't able to express them. And I think that's really important, that it's not just a bad guy. It's something that he does bring something out in her that she has buried. And for me, so that was about kind of finding parts of that early on in the show before he comes in. And really, because there's not much dialogue on the page, it was about being really specific about what her house looks like, how she conducts herself on her own at home, how she interacts with her friends and family, and what she wears at work. I mean, she's seen as, she doesn't make much of an effort. She's wearing the worst shoes. She doesn't even notice really that she's not kind of actively participating in life in a way. She's sort of floating through. And I think those choices all really help, when you're building a character like that hasn't got monologues explaining their life. You have to do it other ways, how physically she stands, and how she engages with him. And I think that was really fun to kind of indulge in and work on with Harry, who wrote it as well as directed it.
Yeah. Well, to that, talk about working with Nadia Stacey, who is an incredible hair and makeup artist, and the conversations you had about how Kate would look, given everything that, you've just said, like how she's going to look at work versus when she's, with him versus when she's, with her mother and her friends, like this journey there.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like in a way, Kate didn't change an enormous amount within it. It was the people around her that did. And the person that we focused most on was Tom Burke's character, because, Nadia is amazing. I love her, and a great friend. I worked with her twice now and adore her. But it was, it's making Kate sort of every day in a way that people that we could recognize. I didn't really feel of her as being someone so depressed or traumatized before the event. I think she's got mild depression, but she's not like a traumatized individual. But I think it was about, because it's all through her lens and subjectivity, it's about the people she encounters, how they look to her. And certainly Blonde. So Blonde, he's objectified. We don't ever know his name apart from Blonde. That's kind of a major statement in itself. And initially, through 3/4 of the film, he is a certain way. He has to look sexy. She's sort of drawn to him. In the book, the first image is on his crotch. That's what Kate sees first. So her sexuality is, she owns that she has sexuality and she has needs, and they are clearly stated in the book as well as in the film. And he is almost imagined in the first dream sequence. So the blonde hair was obviously vital, but also when she sees him clearly, by the end of the movie, it was like, right, we're going to shoot him slightly differently, not in such an attractive manner. Poor Tom, he was like, right, we're going to make you look sort of ugly now. We're going to put you in really sort of awful clothes. And suddenly she's seeing him in a way she never had before. The veil has been lifted, and the donkey she fell in love with is now a donkey, and she's seeing him for the first time like that. So discussions with Nadia, discussions with Matt, who is also costumer, discussions with Tom, it was like, how do we make that change? And it's all through Kate's point of view. How do we make that change? So subtle enough, but nuanced enough that you can see it, the audience are aware of it too.
Yeah. Talking about the dance floor scene at the end when she's, in the whole club, it's such an incredible moment because it speaks so much to everything. Like, talk about filming that scene.
Yeah, it was always Harry sort of came up with PJ Harvey as a song choice for that, and I love PJ. Always loved her music, and it always represents for me sort of empowerment and women's sort of empowerment. And I thought you needed a song with extraordinary bass and energy to it. That scene we actually shot in Margate or Ramsgate. I mean, it's not in Spain, and it was in some horrible dive in, or I don't know, empty space in Ramsgate. And actually, you know, COVID interrupted our filming, so we did 1 week before COVID broke out, and then we had to come back and do 5 weeks, 4 months later, or 5 months later. So none of us had done any dancing or done any socializing for so long. And it's the first moment I got to kind of let loose with other people on a dance floor for months after the madness of COVID, first lockdown. So I think there was obviously part of that going on there, but we didn't rehearse it. We didn't even talk about it. It was like, I knew that I was just going to let rip and go full, do my sort of dancing, which whatever that is, you know, and we did, when we were shooting it, we had loads of people around. And then in the moment, we were like, we should get a shot of this, just me on my own dancing too, which kind of helps with the whole imaginative world that we created cinematographically with the piece. So we got a shot of me just dancing on my own too. And Ashley Connor, who's the DP on it, she was amazing because she's a really fluid filmmaker. She operates the camera as well as lights the image, and she would be following. We worked very closely together. By the end, we were kind of in symbiosis. You know, she knew what I was feeling. She was in there with the camera, feeling every thought and sensation that Kate was feeling. And that's a really great sort of dynamic when you have that, you know, when you're working so closely with the DP like that. So she was there on the dance floor with me, coming in the camera. So it was a great moment, not only for the film, but also in life after COVID hell, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so glad you mentioned Ashley, because, yeah, as you said, as the DP, like just her work and what she did, even in that scene alone, it's just, you didn't need dialogue. It was just everything captured through the lighting, through.
She was amazing because she would be able to sense the intimacy of the scene and know what was happening. If I was doing something with my hands, or there's a moment where Tom and our hands sort of entwine at the lake, and, you know, she would sense that, see it, and go down and get it and capture it. So the camera was constantly moving. She was always finding things and nuance and subtleties that we were doing that, you know, if you've got the camera this close, you're not going to see, but she would move and find it. So she was great. She was really sort of flexible and very inspirational to have on set. And then the other person that I want to mention as well as was Alex Baranovsky, who did the sound, because that was quite a process finding the music on this piece. And there's a humor to Kate that I wanted represented. Harry and I both wanted represented in the music and the sound. Again, it's kind of the sound that's in her head. And it was always interesting that we didn't want the sound to represent what the audience should be feeling. We wanted it to represent what Kate was feeling. So even if we as an audience were scared for her, the music represented what she was feeling, which was a sort of lightness. So the scene in the car park, first car park scene where they have sex in the car park, and it feels quite dark and depressing and scary. And Alex originally went down that route, and they were like, no, for Kate, she's having a great time. And that's the conflict you want as an audience to be like, what is she doing? But she's having a wild time in the car park. But we should be inside her head, you know, that should be what's represented.
I love that, because it just helps the journey, as you say, like as an audience member, to be like, but wait, the music isn't telling us how to feel.
Yes.
Like it's not leading us down that path. We know there's something not right, quite right, but we're not sure what it is. But Kate is she's in her own obsessive, like, I'm into this, you know, journey. This is your first outing as a producer. Like, talk about why, you know, first of all, your production company is called Lady Lazarus, right? The name behind that, and just like how that's helped you as an actress in terms of like how you're able to kind of define your career now and take control of it by being a producer.
Yeah, I mean, my first experience of producing was doing Mrs. Wilson. Actually, it wasn't under my production company, but that was the first real experience I had of having a story, a very personal story that I got made. And it was a thrilling and really satisfying, much more holistic experience of the whole industry for me. I mean, acting, I love acting, but you are always a tiny little part in a massive world of storytelling. And in some ways, by being at the inception of an idea and seeing it through to its end, feels much more holistic. You know, it feels like you're going on the whole journey. And all the people you work with and collaborate with, I love that. I love working with the designers, with the writers, with the casting directors, everyone. For me, that's really exciting, and it feels sort of much more meaty. And True Things, so Lady Lazarus, the name of it I was doing Hedda Gabler at the National, and I'd been reading Sylvia Plath diaries and poems, and she wrote a poem called Lady Lazarus, and it's about the sort of rebirth of women. I mean, Lazarus comes back from the dead. So it's about female sort of coming back from the dead and reinventing themselves. And so that's kind of the sensibility of it. And I just think it's really lovely to be in a position where you can make work and go to people and find stories that you love. And I've got a producing partner that is amazing, is an amazing reader. So she'll find properties and books that people have long forgotten about. And for me, it's always about finding those stories. They're out there. The stories exist. They're everywhere. And they're amazing and female-led stories. But we just, they're still to be found. And that's the beauty of it. It's like, if you look, you'll find. So I feel like it's a really lovely next stage of my career that now I can start making the work myself and start finding those source materials and start putting those stories on screen. And I'll do just acting jobs too, because that's nice just to do that and all the pressure. But it is nice to also feel more involved.
Yeah. How do you decide on saying yes to projects, whether it's doing, something on the West End or acting, or like, I want to, this is coming away, this is something I want to produce, like talk about that.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think it's really hard to know how decisions happen, really. They're quite ephemeral. You don't really know. There's many different sort of factors that take place in a decision. And so it's just you at the time in your life, what you need, what you want, how much you want to be involved. Sometimes there's a need for you to attach, because then you're going to get it made. There's sometimes just, I don't know, it's all very different things. So for theatre, I always know when I have a need for theatre. It's sort of, there's a calling that I have to do a play every now and then. And it usually comes every 2 years. It's just like a little get back on stage. And it's where I feel most empowered, actually, as a performer. And I think it's partly because that live experience is like none other. It's you and an audience telling a story together or believing in a story together. And that's sort of magical. So I need that to sort of empower me every now and then, weirdly. And it's scary as hell, getting on stage, but that drives me. So that's the thing that calls back every now and then. And then choices, I don't know. It's like what feels new, what the team is, who the people involved are. If there's often it's the character, the first thing that stands out for me. It's like, what is the character like? And is that something that I fall in love with?
This is a group, the audience is a group of your peers, fellow actors, and, you've mentioned acting on stage. How does the theatrical experience help you when, you're doing a film or you're in a TV series? Like,
I think they both help each other. Like there's, I don't really know. I mean, there's a discipline to theatre, I suppose, and there's a kind of you need to know your lines. You need to turn up on time. There's a real discipline to performance on stage, which is sort of ingrained, and perhaps that helps just for preparation for TV and film. But I think TV and film help theatre in a way of getting into the real nuance of thought. Like the camera sees things that an audience can't because it gets so close. So there's a sense of the intricacies of detail that you need on screen. Which you need on stage too, but they're more physical, they're more in your whole body, whereas the camera sees your thoughts. So I think that it helps you to be even more nuanced on the stage, like film and TV help that. They kind of help bolster each other. And the more I can play and dip my fingers into both, I just think it gets more exciting for me and more interesting for me.
Yeah.
I don't know about other people. It's for me.
I want to go back to True Things for a minute. Working with Ita O'Brien, who is, you know, the intimacy coordinator, like, I feel like through several years ago, you know, people weren't talking about intimacy coordinators. What was that like working with her, and the importance of having somebody like that, you know, alongside you, and just how, you know, the role of the intimacy coordinator has changed, but for the better, in the sense of, you know, the work that you get to do.
Yeah, I think, look, prior to intimacy coaches, and some people have issues with having to be an intimacy coach and everything, but prior to that, dialogue wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening, not in an open, practical way as to how to approach very vulnerable making scenes and intimate scenes. So rather than getting to the day and there being an awful lot of awkwardness and miscommunication and upset or vulnerability, or, you know, and that's the best case scenario. You know, worst case is being exploited or feeling like abused or anything in those scenarios, then you have someone that's a middle person, a middleman, middle woman, who can negotiate and actually open up that discussion in a very practical manner. So you're dealing with things in a really upfront, clear way prior to the event and then on the day too. And it means that the director, I think directors like having them around as well, because actually they feel safer in a way. They've got a language. There's someone who has the language to communicate, but also, you know, if they say, I would love to get this kind of feeling from that scene. I want to see this. I would love that to happen. So then it's sort of an act of negotiation and, you know, and collaboration as to how that's achieved with the actors and their feelings of where they feel safe and not safe. So I think it's really great for everyone. And the more it will happen, the more it will just feel normal and people get used to it being there. But it becomes then, I mean, on True Things, it was so much, I mean, I was close to Tom anyway, like we're good friends. So there wasn't awkwardness in that way, but there is always awkwardness around what you're comfortable with and what you're not. And actually it felt so much easier to have someone there who was going to practically help you through and have these conversations. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Love that. Okay, so let's go back. Take us back to little Ruth watching TV, or whether it's the BBC or ITV, or like even going to the theatre. When did you know or learn that acting was a career and you're like, this is what I want to do?
I don't know if
there a film or TV or show?
I think it was a slow process of realization, but I think I always put everything slightly on the age 8, my age 8, in a way. It felt like a very significant age. But I had some weird mystery illness for a few months. I don't quite know what was wrong with me. It might have been psychological, but basically I took to my bed for a number of months. And we had a cleaner called Frankie, who was American, and she was an ex-actress, and she used to sort of chain smoke, and she was a real character. And she and I would sit every afternoon and watch old movies together. And I think that's where my sort of love for old movies, old black and white American movies, and came, actually, was watching those with her. And then after that, I did acting in a theatre club, and then I studied it. And eventually I admitted to myself that I wanted to act. But that wasn't until age 21 that I said that I wanted to be an actor. So it took me a while to admit what I wanted to do. It's a bit like Kate in the film True Things. It takes a while to work out and have the confidence to say I want to act.
Love that. Ruth, thank you so much. On behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I want to thank you for sharing your experience, your process and craft with your fellow performers. And thank you so much for that incredible conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.